The CEO strode into the opulent lobby of the five-star hotel, his sharp suit a testament to his success, but the hostile glances from the staff spoke louder than the polished marble floors beneath his feet. As he approached the front desk, the receptionist's smile faltered just for a moment, enough to notice. He stood, unfazed, exuding confidence, but his gut twisted with a familiar sensation of being an outsider in this world of whitewashed luxury. Suddenly, the manager stepped up, an air of feigned politeness. "Sir, I'm afraid we cannot accommodate you at this time," he said, his voice cold. The words landed like a slap, a thinly veiled insult. The CEO's eyes hardened, but he didn't flinch. The message was clear: his presence wasn't wanted here. In a moment, the decision was made. This wasn't just about being rejected, it was about the principle of his existence in a world that still treated him as less than. Get out of my hotel. Now, the manager snapped, voice rising with a subtle edge of panic, realizing he'd overstepped in his delivery. In that instant, the CEO's mind raced with the years of subtle slights and blatant racism he'd endured, each one building up to this very moment. Without saying another word, he turned on his heel, his jaw clenched, but something within him had shifted. He didn't just want to leave. He wanted change. He needed action. The CEO returned to his penthouse suite, his emotions a whirlwind of rage and disbelief. Then, with a calm he hadn't known he possessed, he reached for his phone. A single call would change everything. The message was simple: effective immediately. "I'm firing everyone. Every last one of you. No one is safe from this moment." He hung up before the response came, already knowing the ripple effect would be massive. His decision was swift, his resolve stronger than ever. He wasn't just fighting for his place at this hotel, he was fighting for every person who'd been kicked out, humiliated, or dismissed because of the color of their skin. Now, he would burn it all down. It was time to make a stand, not just for himself, but for the silent many who had been silenced for far too long. Stay tuned for part 2 of this intense saga, where the CEO takes his fight to the very top. Will he find the justice he's seeking, or will the system break him first? Click here to continue the journey into a world where race, power, and revenge collide in ways you won't see coming. The CEO walked into the luxurious lobby of the hotel, his tailored suit a clear sign of success, but the cold stares from the staff hit him harder than any words could. As he approached the front desk, the receptionist's forced smile faltered, her eyes lingering just a moment too long enough for him to notice. He stood tall, confident, but inside, a familiar knot of discomfort tightened in his stomach, a reminder that he didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes. The manager appeared, all smiles at first, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. "I'm afraid we won't be able to accommodate you, sir," he said, his tone distant, almost rehearsed. The words hung in the air, and before the CEO could speak, the manager's face hardened. "Please leave now." The CEO's jaw tightened. He could feel the years of subtle insults, the discrimination he'd experienced since day one in this business. With a steady breath, he turned and walked out, but not without a fierce determination building inside him. This wasn't just a hotel, this was a symbol of the world that had never truly accepted him. Back in his penthouse, the CEO sat in silence, his mind racing. It wasn't just about the hotel, it was about the hundreds of other places, people, and systems that looked down on him because of the color of his skin. He pulled out his phone, eyes locked on the screen, and made a single call. The message was simple but final: "I'm firing everyone. Everyone. No one is safe. This ends now." The line went silent as he hung up, the weight of his decision sinking in. He wasn't just making a point anymore. He was starting a revolution. He didn't care about their reactions, he cared about showing them, once and for all, that no one could get away with this. Stay tuned for part 2, where the CEO takes this battle to the highest levels of power. Will he find justice, or will the system crush him? Click here to see what happens next in this explosive tale of race, power, and revenge. The CEO sat in his high-rise office, staring out the window at the city below. The world was sprawling out there, a mixture of opportunity and barriers. He had spent his entire career fighting against the odds, but today, something inside him felt different. The rejection from the hotel was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the culmination of years of being underestimated, disregarded, and humiliated in countless ways. Now, he was done. The decision was made. He had to burn it all down, start fresh, and make them all pay ***. His phone buzzed on the desk, a message from his assistant. It was a list of the key players in the company, the ones who would need to be replaced. The ones who had been complicit in the systematic ignorance that had kept him fighting this fight for so long. The anger bubbled up again, but it wasn't just rage, it was fuel. He typed a quick message, hitting send before he had time to second-guess himself. "We need to meet. Now." As he waited for the meeting to begin, the memories flooded back, the countless times he'd been overlooked at conferences, the dismissive looks from potential clients, and the way people had tried to undercut him at every turn. He had earned his spot at the top, but it was never enough. No matter what he accomplished, the color of his skin was always the first thing people saw. He wasn't a CEO in their eyes, he was just another black man who'd managed to rise above his station. ***. The door to his office opened, and his trusted team walked in, all nervous energy and anticipation. The air felt heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. The CEO stood, his gaze cold, unyielding. He didn't need to say much, the decision had already been made. ***. You've all seen the email. You know why we're here. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I'm making changes. Big changes. I'm taking this company in a new direction, one where we don't just survive, but thrive. And if you can't see that vision, then you're out." One by one, his team members looked at each other, a mix of confusion and disbelief on their faces. But the CEO didn't give them the chance to ask questions. He had been clear. If they didn't understand the stakes, if they didn't understand the urgency of this moment, then they were no longer part of the plan. ***. The tension in the room was palpable, but the CEO remained steady. This wasn't just a corporate shakeup, it was a statement. He wasn't going to let the same people who had held him back continue to occupy positions of power in his company. He had spent too many years being polite, trying to play by the rules. But the rules had never worked for him. ***. The meeting ended without much fanfare. The team members walked out of the room, unsure of what had just transpired, but the CEO didn't care. He had made his choice, and he was ready to move forward. The battle was just beginning, and he wasn't going to stop until he had created the change he had always dreamed of. ***. In the coming weeks, the CEO would take his vision to new heights, shaking up the industry, exposing the deep-seated prejudices that still ruled the corporate world. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be a lot of people who would try to take him down, but he was prepared. This fight was bigger than just him. It was about setting a new precedent for what was possible when someone refused to accept the limitations imposed upon them. ***. Stay tuned for part 3, where the CEO faces even more obstacles on his journey to break free from the system. Will he succeed in changing the corporate world forever, or will the forces working against him prove too powerful to overcome? ***. Click here to follow the rest of this gripping story as the stakes continue to rise and the CEO's revolution gathers momentum. The CEO stood at the edge of his office, looking out over the city skyline, the bright lights below a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He had made his mark on the corporate world, but what he had just begun was so much more than a business shakeup, it was a revolution. He had disrupted the industry, but now he was ready to tear it all down and rebuild from the ground up. There was no turning back. The calls had been made, the changes set in motion. His next step was clear. It wasn't enough to make a statement in his own company, he had to take it further. ***. He walked over to his desk, scanning the new list of contacts he had compiled over the past few weeks, investors, activists, industry leaders, all potential allies who could help him reshape the landscape. He knew it would be a fight. The old guard wouldn't go down without a struggle. But that didn't matter to him. He had spent his life playing by their rules, and look where it had gotten him. It was time to create his own rules. ***. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was his new chief strategist, a brilliant mind who shared his vision for a world where race wasn't a barrier to success. The strategist walked in, her expression serious but determined. ***, we need to talk strategy, she said, laying out a detailed plan. The media's starting to catch wind of your actions, but we need to control the narrative. If we want to bring down the system, we have to expose the hypocrisy within the industry itself. It's time for a full-scale public campaign. The CEO listened intently, his mind already racing with possibilities. A public campaign wasn't just about drawing attention, it was about making the system's flaws undeniable. He would use the media's scrutiny to his advantage, turning every article, every interview, every headline into an opportunity to expose the deep-seated racism and inequality in corporate America. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of media interviews, press releases, and strategic meetings. The CEO was everywhere, on television, in newspapers, online. But he wasn't just talking about his company's growth or his new hires. He was talking about the system that had kept people like him at the margins, about the systemic racism that pervaded the very fabric of corporate America. Every word he spoke was calculated, every gesture designed to push the conversation further. He wasn't just playing the game, he was changing it, ***, and the reaction was swift. The corporate world, the investors, and even some of his former colleagues began to push back. They didn't like being exposed, and they certainly didn't like being challenged. But the CEO had no time for their outrage. He had made his choice. He wasn't backing down, and he wasn't asking for permission anymore. As the media frenzy continued, the CEO found himself at the center of a massive movement. His name became synonymous with defiance, with standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. But this was just the beginning. The real battle was about to unfold, and he was ready. He knew that the industry would fight him every step of the way, but he was prepared for it. The time for compromise was over. It was time to break through the glass ceilings and prove that success wasn't limited by the color of your skin. ***. Stay tuned for part 4, where the CEO faces even greater challenges as the stakes continue to rise. Will his revolution succeed, or will the forces working against him crush everything he has built? ***. Click here to continue the journey into this powerful story of resistance, resilience, and revolution. The CEO sat back in his chair, the weight of his decision settling in as he watched the latest news coverage on his phone. The media frenzy surrounding him had only intensified in the past few days, with debates erupting on social platforms and in boardrooms alike. Some called him a hero, a trailblazer, while others decried him as a troublemaker, a man trying to break a system that had worked for decades. But to him, it wasn't about heroism or villainy, it was about making a stand for what was right. It was about taking action in a world that had systematically silenced people like him. ***. He had expected resistance, but the backlash was fiercer than he anticipated. Corporate America, with all its power and influence, wasn't about to let him change the game so easily. He had become the target of a coordinated campaign to discredit him. Rumors, half-truths, and outright lies were flooding the media, each more damaging than the last. But the CEO wasn't shaken. The more they tried to tear him down, the more determined he became. He knew that this was the price of change. Those in power never let go without a fight. ***. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. His company's stock took a hit, investors began to question his leadership, and some of his closest allies started to waver. But the CEO refused to back down. He had made a promise to himself that he would change this industry, no matter the cost. And he wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. His team rallied around him, bolstered by the growing support of employees who had once been silenced but now felt empowered by his actions. They were ready to fight alongside him. And together, they began to strategize for the next phase of their plan. ***. But just when he thought he had a handle on the situation, a new challenge emerged. A former colleague, someone he had once trusted, had gone public with a damning story. They claimed that the CEO had used unethical practices to get ahead in his career. The accusation was carefully crafted to exploit his rise from nothing, casting doubt on his entire career. The media pounced, and suddenly, the CEO was forced to face yet another battle, his own integrity. ***. This time, however, the CEO knew that the truth was on his side. He had nothing to hide. His success had come through years of hard work, overcoming obstacles, and relentlessly pushing against a system that was built to keep people like him down. He knew the stakes had never been higher, and if he wanted to win this war, he had to stay focused. The only way out was through ***. He called an emergency press conference, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. The world was watching, and this was his chance to set the record straight. He stood in front of the cameras, his demeanor calm and confident, but his eyes burning with resolve. Let me make one thing clear, he began, his voice unwavering. I've never taken a shortcut to success. Every step I've taken has been earned. I have fought against a system that has tried to bury me, and I'm still standing. What they are trying to do is destroy me, but I won't let that happen. I will not be silenced. The press conference was a turning point. The CEO's words resonated with many who had been skeptical of him, and for the first time, he saw the tide begin to turn. The media, which had once been his biggest enemy, was now beginning to listen. But this was just the beginning. The fight for his legacy, for the future of corporate America, was far from over. He had taken his first step, but there was still a long road ahead. Stay tuned for part 5, where the CEO faces even more obstacles as the battle intensifies. Will his message of resistance break through the system's defenses, or will the powerful forces working against him find a way to silence him once and for all? Click here to continue the journey of this incredible revolution and witness the CEO's fight for a new world order. The CEO stood alone in his office, staring at the rows of emails and messages flooding his inbox. The press conference had been a turning point, but the battle was far from over. He knew that while his words had resonated with some, there were still powerful forces out there working tirelessly to destroy him. The attacks had shifted from accusations of unethical practices to questioning his very right to lead, to be in the room at all. The whispers of "how did he get here" followed him everywhere. Yet, he remained undeterred. He had come too far to back down now. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from his most trusted advisor: "We need to prepare for the next wave. They're circling." He felt a flicker of unease. He had expected the resistance, but it was beginning to feel like they would stop at nothing. Yet, there was no time for hesitation. He had to stay one step ahead. He responded quickly, "Set up the meeting with the investors. We go bigger." A few days later, he found himself in a high-stakes meeting with a group of investors. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes cold and calculating. The CEO was used to the pressure, after all, this was his world. But this time, the stakes were higher. He was no longer just fighting for profit margins and stock prices, he was fighting for the future of the company, and for a new generation of leaders who had been kept out for too long. The investors were skeptical, their doubts hanging in the air like thick smoke. They questioned the CEO's methods, his commitment to the vision he had outlined, and whether his revolution would actually succeed. But the CEO, calm and unyielding, stood his ground. He knew that their skepticism was rooted in fear of change, fear of losing control. They had built their empires on a system that thrived on inequality, and now that system was being threatened. But he wasn't going to apologize for that. You can question my methods all you want, the CEO said, his voice steady but firm. But this is the future. This is what the world is demanding. You can either stand with us, or be left behind. His words hung in the air, sharp and forceful. The room was silent for a moment, and then one of the investors spoke up, breaking the tension. You're asking for a lot, but maybe you're right. Maybe the world is changing. But you better be sure about this. If we back you, we're all in. The CEO nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. He had expected this moment of hesitation before the leap. The path ahead was still uncertain, but this was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. The investors had agreed to back him, not just financially, but with their influence. They had seen the truth in his words. This was bigger than just business. It was a revolution, and they were ready to be part of it. As the meeting ended, the CEO walked out of the boardroom with a renewed sense of purpose. His revolution was gaining momentum, but he knew there were still obstacles ahead. The media would continue to attack, the corporate world would continue to resist, and there would be moments when he would feel the weight of it all. But he was ready. This was his fight, and he was no longer just playing the game, he was changing it. Stay tuned for part 6, where the CEO takes his fight to new heights, facing even more challenges and pushing forward with his vision of a new corporate world. Will he succeed in overcoming the forces working against him, or will he be crushed by the weight of the system he seeks to tear down? Click here to continue this gripping story of defiance, power, and transformation. The CEO sat at his desk, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on him. The pressure from every side was relentless. His revolution had begun to take shape, but now, with more eyes on him than ever, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. He had secured backing from the investors, but the battle was far from over. The media had been quick to latch onto the narrative of his unprecedented rise, but now they were focusing on the cracks in his story, picking apart every move he made, searching for any weakness they could exploit. His every action was under a microscope, and one wrong move could mean the end of everything he had worked for. **** Yet, he was undeterred. This wasn't just about proving his critics wrong, it was about setting an example. It was about showing the world that change was possible, no matter how difficult the path. He had come too far to back down now. His phone buzzed, bringing him out of his thoughts. It was a text from his chief strategist: "We need to move quickly. They are gaining ground." He knew exactly what she meant. The backlash was growing, and the stakes were higher than ever. There was no room for mistakes. ***. The CEO took a deep breath and stood up. It was time to take his fight to the next level. He called an emergency meeting with his leadership team. As they gathered in the conference room, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew the situation was critical. This wasn't just about financial stability anymore. It was about survival, surviving in a system that was rigged against them, a system that had tried to keep people like him out for far too long. ***. We need to make our move," the CEO said, his voice steady but firm. "We've got the backing we need, but now we have to strike. We can't let them control the narrative any longer. We are the future, and it's time we take the lead." His team looked at him with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. They knew the risks, but they also knew that this was their chance to change the course of history. The CEO's words resonated with them. This was bigger than just business. This was about rewriting the rules, about building something that could outlast them all. ***. Over the next few weeks, the CEO and his team launched a bold new initiative. It wasn't just a business campaign, it was a call to arms. They used every resource at their disposal to turn the tables. They began to expose the systemic biases that still permeated the industry, not just with words, but with actions. They partnered with grassroots organizations, activists, and other influential leaders who shared their vision for a new future. The movement gained traction quickly, drawing attention from all corners of the world. ***. But as expected, the backlash was swift and unforgiving. The corporate elites and their allies pushed back with everything they had. The CEO's company faced coordinated attacks, both online and offline. The pressure was unrelenting, but the CEO stood firm. He knew that they had to push through the storm, because if they did, they would emerge stronger on the other side. ***. As the battle raged on, the CEO found himself more determined than ever. He had come to realize that true change would never come easy. It wasn't just about making noise or gaining followers, it was about dismantling the very systems that had kept people like him at bay for so long. This fight was personal, but it was also about something much bigger. ***. Stay tuned for part 7, where the CEO faces even more intense challenges as the fight for equality reaches new heights. Will he overcome the forces arrayed against him, or will the system crush his revolution before it has a chance to fully take root? ***. Click here to continue the journey into this thrilling story of resistance and change, where the CEO's vision for a new world hangs in the balance. The CEO sat in his office late into the night, the weight of the past few weeks pressing heavily on his shoulders. The fight had escalated quickly, and as his revolution gained momentum, the opposition grew more aggressive. The corporate world, which had once seemed so powerful and untouchable, now felt fragile under the pressure of change. He had expected resistance, but the intensity with which they were attacking him, both personally and professionally, was taking a toll. The media smear campaigns, the anonymous online threats, the whispers in boardrooms, they were all part of a calculated effort to break him down. But he wouldn't yield. Not now. Not when so much was on the line. ***. He turned his gaze to the news coverage on his laptop. The headlines were relentless: CEO under fire for radical change, is this the end of corporate stability? Black CEO's leadership being questioned. Every headline was a challenge, a statement that they were going to fight him with everything they had. But with every attack, his resolve grew stronger. He knew that he was on the right path, that this fight was bigger than just him. It was about creating a world where opportunities were not determined by the color of one's skin. ****. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his chief strategist. "We have a problem," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "They've mobilized a campaign to discredit us, targeting our investors, our partners, and even our employees. It's all part of a coordinated effort to isolate us and make our revolution seem like a passing phase." The CEO's pulse quickened, but he remained calm. This was just another tactic to shake his foundation. "I've expected this," he said, his voice steady. "We'll fight back. We've got the truth on our side, and that's what matters. We have to keep pushing. They can't stop us if we stay united." He hung up the phone and stood up, his mind already racing with plans. This was his moment of reckoning. He had to go on the offensive. It wasn't enough to sit back and wait for the storm to pass. He had to turn the tide in his favor, and fast. The next move had to be bold, decisive, and clear. He needed to show the world that the fight for equality, for justice, was not just a fleeting moment. It was a movement. A revolution that could not and would not be stopped. ***. The following days were a blur of meetings, press statements, and strategy sessions. The CEO appeared on every major news outlet, speaking not just about his company, but about the system that had stifled innovation, diversity, and progress for so long. He wasn't just defending his actions anymore, he was framing the narrative, taking control of the conversation. He made it clear that this was not just a fight for him, but for every person who had been overlooked, excluded, or shut out of opportunities because of the color of their skin. ***. The media began to shift. Slowly, but surely, the narrative started to change. Where there had once been skepticism, there was now curiosity. People were beginning to see the larger picture, and the public outcry for systemic change grew louder. The CEO's message was clear: the status quo could no longer be tolerated. The fight for equality was not a passing trend, it was the future. ***. But the battle was far from over. As his movement gained traction, new enemies emerged. Powerful figures who had previously remained silent now spoke out, attempting to discredit him and undermine everything he had built. The CEO knew this was just the beginning of a long, difficult fight, but he was more determined than ever. He had come too far to let the system defeat him now. He was ready for whatever came next. Stay tuned for part 8, where the CEO faces the fiercest opposition yet, as the forces trying to hold him down make their final move. Will his revolution succeed, or will the weight of the corporate world's resistance crush everything he's worked for? Click here to continue following this gripping story of resilience, defiance, and the fight for a new world order. The CEO sat alone in his office, staring at the mountain of emails and messages on his screen. The storm was growing stronger. His public statements had shifted the narrative, but now the attacks were coming harder and faster than before. They were no longer just questioning his leadership, they were questioning his very existence in the corporate world. His enemies were relentless, and they knew that this fight would determine the future of the industry. They were not going to let him tear down their world without a fight. But the CEO was ready. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down. The phone rang, snapping him back to reality. It was his chief strategist. "We've got a major problem," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They've rallied their top allies, and now they're moving to cut off our funding. Some of our investors are starting to waver." The CEO felt the weight of her words. It was a serious blow. Cutting off his financial support could cripple everything he had worked for. But he couldn't afford to be intimidated. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He stood up, walking over to the window. He had always known that change wouldn't come easily. There would be moments when it seemed like the world was stacked against him. But this wasn't just about money, it was about the future of his people, the people who had been excluded for so long. He couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. Set up a meeting with the investors who are still with us, he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We need to take the fight to them. They want to play dirty? Fine. We'll show them how to fight back." The next few days were a whirlwind. The CEO and his team worked around the clock, preparing for the showdown that was coming. They met with investors, activists, and community leaders who shared their vision for a more inclusive corporate world. They organized rallies, spoke at conferences, and made sure their message reached as many people as possible. The media that had once attacked him was now forced to cover his efforts. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The movement was growing, and it was no longer just about one man's fight, it was about a movement that was bigger than anyone could have imagined. Then, the moment came. The CEO stood before a room full of investors, their faces a mix of skepticism and hope. He had been down this road before, but this time, there was something different in the air. He wasn't just talking about his vision for the future, he was showing them that his revolution had the power to change everything. He wasn't asking for their approval anymore, he was demanding that they stand with him. You've seen the headlines, the CEO said, his voice unwavering. You know what's at stake. I didn't get here by following the rules. I got here by breaking them. And if you want to be part of something bigger than just a business, then stand with me. This fight is not just mine, it's for everyone who has ever been held back, pushed aside, or told they don't belong. There was a long silence as the investors looked at each other, weighing their options. The CEO held his ground, knowing that this was the moment that would decide everything. Finally, one of the investors stood up. You've got our support, he said, his voice firm. We're with you. Let's do this. The room erupted in applause. The CEO had won. But the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning. The forces working against him had not been defeated, they were regrouping, preparing for their next move. But the CEO was ready. He had the support he needed, and now it was time to take his revolution to the next level. Stay tuned for part 9, where the CEO's revolution hits new heights, facing even more challenges as the fight for equality reaches its climax. Will he be able to take down the system, or will the forces against him crush everything he's fought for? Click here to continue following this incredible journey of resistance and change. As the CEO fights for a new world order, the CEO stood at the front of the packed auditorium, the lights dimmed as the crowd waited in anticipation. It had been a long and difficult journey, but everything had led to this moment. The revolution was gaining ground, and he had become the symbol of a new era in corporate America. The media, once his greatest adversary, now turned their attention to him as he prepared to deliver his most important speech yet. This wasn't just about business, it was about setting a new standard, about breaking down the barriers that had kept so many from rising to the top. His fight was no longer just his own, it was the fight for all the voices that had been silenced for too long. The crowd hushed as he stepped up to the podium, the weight of his words heavier than ever. He glanced out at the sea of faces in front of him, activists, investors, employees, and members of the press, people who had been following his journey, watching him push against the system, willing him to succeed. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. Today, we are at a crossroads. Today, we face a choice between continuing the same cycle of inequality, or breaking free and building a world where everyone, regardless of their background, can thrive. The old ways have failed us, but we have the power to change it. The revolution is not just a movement, it is a transformation, a new foundation built on the belief that we can and will do better. His words echoed through the auditorium, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of the journey he had embarked on. He had taken risks, made enemies, and sacrificed everything to get here, but the battle was far from over. The forces that had tried to silence him were still out there, lurking in the shadows, preparing their next move. The system that had worked against him for so long was still entrenched, and he knew it would take more than just words to bring it down. But for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. The CEO stood tall, unwavering. He had gathered an army of allies, people who believed in the cause and were willing to stand with him, no matter the cost. The opposition would fight back with everything they had, but he had the truth on his side, and that was more powerful than any campaign of lies or deceit. As he continued, his voice grew stronger, more impassioned. We are not here to beg for a seat at the table. We are here to build a new table. A table where everyone has a place. This is not about being included in a system that was never designed for us, this is about creating something new. A system that values every voice, every perspective, and every dream, regardless of the color of your skin or the circumstances of your birth. The crowd erupted in applause, and for a moment, the CEO allowed himself to feel a sense of triumph. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for, the moment he had dreamed of. But he knew it wasn't over. The real work was just beginning. **** After the speech, the CEO left the stage, his heart racing. The battle was reaching its peak. As his team rallied around him, preparing for the next phase of the revolution, he knew that the next few weeks would be critical. The system would not roll over easily, and the opposition would fight with everything they had. But he had already proven that he was not afraid of them. He would push forward, no matter the cost. ***. Stay tuned for part 10, where the revolution reaches its most intense phase yet. Will the CEO's fight for a new world order succeed, or will the powerful forces working against him crush everything he has fought for? ***. Click here to continue this thrilling journey of resistance, resilience, and transformation. The CEO walked into the boardroom, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. His revolution had reached its most critical point, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His speech had ignited a firestorm of support, but it had also drawn the ire of the most powerful forces in corporate America. Now, more than ever, he knew that the next move would determine everything. His allies were rallying behind him, but the opposition was growing stronger. The battle for the future was about to reach its apex, and there was no turning back. ***. As the CEO took his seat at the head of the table, his trusted team gathered around him, their faces a mixture of determination and apprehension. They had come a long way, but the fight was far from over. The CEO looked at them, his gaze steady, and spoke with the calm confidence that had carried him through every challenge so far. ***. This is it. We've come too far to let them win. The stakes have never been higher, but we have something they'll never have: the truth, and the power of a movement that's bigger than all of us. We are changing the system, and we will not stop until we've created a world where equality is no longer just a dream." The room fell silent. The gravity of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, the CEO allowed himself to believe that victory was within reach. He had built an army of supporters, people who believed in him, in his vision, and in the power of what they were trying to create. They weren't just fighting for him, they were fighting for a future where the color of one's skin no longer dictated their success, where every person had the same opportunity to rise. ***. We've secured the backing we need," the CEO continued, his voice unwavering. "Now it's time to take the fight to the next level. We're going to use our influence to push this revolution into every corner of the corporate world. It's time to go public with everything we've uncovered. We'll expose the inequality, the corruption, and the systems that have kept us all down. The world needs to see the truth, and we're going to make sure they do." His team nodded in agreement, ready to follow him into the fray. They had all been through the fire together, and they knew that this was their chance to create lasting change. They had a plan, an audacious, bold plan that would expose the darkest corners of the corporate world and force the powers that be to reckon with the truth. ***. As they began to finalize their strategy, a message came through on the CEO's phone. It was from an anonymous source. The message was brief but chilling: "You're making a mistake. Stop now, or the consequences will be worse than you can imagine." The CEO's grip tightened on the phone as he read the message. He knew that the threats would come, but this one felt different. It wasn't just an empty warning, it was a direct challenge. But instead of feeling fear, the CEO felt a surge of defiance. He had already lost everything once. He wasn't going to let anyone intimidate him now. ***. They can threaten us all they want," he said, his voice cold with resolve. "But this is the moment that defines us. We will not back down. The system has had its day. Now it's time for us to take control." With renewed determination, the CEO and his team set their plan into motion. The next few days were a blur of activity: press conferences, leaked documents, interviews with whistleblowers. The truth began to come to light in ways that the corporate elite had never imagined. They fought back, of course, using every tactic they could think of to discredit him, to turn the public against him, but the CEO's revolution had gathered too much momentum. People were listening now. The system that had long held power was crumbling under the weight of the truth. Stay tuned for part 11, where the revolution reaches its most critical moment. Will the CEO succeed in toppling the corporate system, or will the forces against him finally bring his fight to an end? Click here to continue following this groundbreaking story of resistance, resilience, and the fight for a new world order. The CEO stood at the window of his office, watching the city below as the weight of his decision pressed heavily on him. The revolution was at a crossroads, and he could feel the tides of change crashing against the entrenched walls of corporate America. His movement had taken on a life of its own, but now the forces he had been challenging were coming for him with everything they had. The attacks on his character had escalated, and even those who had once supported him were starting to waver. Yet, despite the pressure mounting around him, the CEO knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He had come too far to let this fight slip away. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was his chief strategist again, her voice crackling with urgency. "We've just received intel," she said, her tone low but firm. "They're preparing to launch a full-scale counterattack. The board is meeting tomorrow, and they're planning to vote on removing you from the company." The CEO's pulse quickened, but his expression remained steady. He had known this day was coming. The board was his final hurdle. They were the ones who could either solidify his revolution or snuff it out before it even fully took root. But no matter how powerful they were, no matter how many resources they had at their disposal, the CEO wasn't about to let them take him down without a fight. He had to act quickly and decisively. Get the legal team on it, he said, his voice cold and controlled. "We'll have our own meeting tomorrow. It's time we take this to them directly. Let's remind them who is truly in control here." The next day, the CEO walked into the boardroom, flanked by his most trusted allies. The faces of the board members were a mix of frustration, fear, and, in some cases, open hostility. They had been backing him, but now they were questioning whether his revolution was worth the risk. He knew they were all under pressure, but this was his moment to show them that he wasn't just a figurehead, he was the future of this company. He was the one who had built it, who had sustained it, and who had pushed it to new heights. "I'm not here to beg for your support," the CEO began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "I'm here to remind you why you hired me in the first place. This company is mine as much as it is yours, and I'm not going to let anyone tear it down." His eyes locked with each member of the board, daring them to challenge him. "The system we're up against is bigger than all of us. But if we stand together, we can be the ones to change it. This isn't just about money or power, it's about justice, fairness, and creating a world where everyone has a chance to succeed. So, ask yourselves, are you going to stand with me, or are you going to let the forces of inequality crush everything we've worked for?" The room was silent. The tension was unbearable. The CEO could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their decision hanging in the air like a thick fog. He had laid it all on the line, and now it was up to them to decide whether they would continue to stand by him or walk away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the board members spoke up. "We're with you," he said, his voice steady. "We'll fight this fight together." A wave of relief washed over the CEO, but he knew that this victory was just one battle in a much larger war. The fight was far from over. The forces against him were still powerful, and they wouldn't back down easily. But for the first time in a long while, the CEO felt that the tide was beginning to turn. He was no longer fighting alone. The revolution had gained a critical mass, and now it was unstoppable. Stay tuned for part 12, where the CEO faces his toughest challenge yet. Will his revolution succeed, or will the system crush him before he can complete his mission? Click here to continue the journey and see how the CEO's fight for justice and equality reaches its dramatic conclusion. The CEO sat at the head of the table, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. This was it, the final showdown. After months of battles, public speeches, and intense pressure, the revolution he had started was now at a tipping point. The board had finally come around, but outside the walls of his company, the forces arrayed against him were preparing their last-ditch effort to crush everything he had fought for. The media, the investors, and even some of his own employees were divided. But the CEO knew one thing: this was the moment that would define his legacy. He was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the future, for the millions of people who had been silenced for far too long. The meeting was scheduled to discuss the final steps in the plan, his plan to bring down the old guard and ensure that his revolution succeeded. He had the support of the board, but now he needed to secure the backing of the public. The time had come to expose the corruption, the discrimination, and the systemic issues that had plagued the corporate world for decades. The CEO knew that the battle wasn't just about him, it was about creating a new world order, one where equality wasn't just a buzzword, but a reality. As he prepared to speak, his thoughts raced. He had come so far, been through so much, but it had all led to this. He had made enemies, yes, but he had also made allies. The movement was bigger than ever, and the message was clear: change was coming, whether they liked it or not. His voice was calm but filled with an unshakable determination as he addressed his team. This is our moment, he said, his eyes sweeping across the room. We've fought long and hard to get here, and now we need to ensure that our message reaches the world. This revolution isn't just about changing the faces at the top. It's about creating a system where everyone, no matter their background, has a chance to succeed. We have the power to do that. We have the support to do that. Now, we finish what we started. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. The gravity of the situation was clear to everyone present. The CEO had no illusions about the obstacles ahead. The old guard would fight back, and the media would continue to paint him as a threat to stability. But he was ready. This wasn't about keeping the peace anymore, it was about breaking through the barriers that had kept people like him out for too long. It was about dismantling the systems of oppression that had been in place for generations. And if they wanted to stop him, they would have to go through him. A voice from the back of the room spoke up. What's the next step? The CEO stood tall, his gaze unwavering. We go public. Tomorrow, we leak everything. The documents, the tapes, the evidence we've gathered. We expose the corruption, the discrimination, and the cover-ups. We make it impossible for them to ignore us any longer. We show the world what they've been hiding. The team nodded, a sense of unity and resolve filling the room. This was it. The final push. The plan was set, and they were ready to act. The revolution had reached its climax, and now it was time to bring it to the masses. The CEO felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his moment. It wasn't just about being the first black CEO. It was about being the catalyst for a new era, a new way of doing business. A way that valued people over profits, fairness over favoritism, and equality over exclusion. The following day, everything was set into motion. The leaks hit the media, and within hours, the corporate world was in chaos. The CEO's words were no longer just a call for change, they were the proof that change had already begun. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The revolution had begun, and it was unstoppable. Stay tuned for part 13, where the consequences of the CEO's actions come to a head. Will he succeed in toppling the corporate system, or will the powers that be crush his revolution once and for all? Click here to continue following this thrilling story of defiance, resistance, and the fight for a new world order.